My name is Kristen Norton. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee, and we are happy to be in February on this rainy Salt Lake City morning. I am from Southern Utah, representing District 15, and I'm going to ask the committee members who are with us to introduce themselves, starting with Vice Chair Cindy Davis.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cindy Davis, and I represent the northern part of Utah County and the very south part of Salt Lake County. Nice to be here.
Good morning. Committee member Straight.
I've done all my exercises and I'm ready to go. Anyway, Brent Straight, I serve Southern Weber County and Northern Davis County, and great place.
Great, we're glad you're here as well. And staff, if you'll just kind of keep me posted, keep Cami posted if you happen to see committee member Bogus, Chair Moss, or Deputy Superintendent Jones, so that we can adjust as needed our agenda to meet their needs. All right, we'll start this morning off with some public comment. I understand we have two people that are with us here today, and then committee members, you should have received an email from State Charter School Board Vice Chair Cynthia Phillips. I noticed in my email that was sent on Wednesday at 1:33. So if you would refer to that for her comments as well. Cami, did Kelly Booth want to speak to action item 2 as well?
Yes, I have not seen her join yet, but
Okay.
I will watch for her. Oh, yep, she is here. I see her now. Sorry.
Okay, let's give her a minute to get signed in and ready to go, and we can be hearing from our second public commenter, and that is Mr. Brett Wilson from Ames.
Good morning. Thanks for hearing me. I'm the CEO, principal of the Academy for Math, Engineering, and Science. We opened in 2003, and part of our charter was to serve students that didn't have early college high schools available. So we've always traditionally run buses to the west side of the Salt Lake Valley. And we worked with Granite for many years, and we're able to send out just a short, little, small invitations to students in all Granite schools that we had our application open. It wasn't recruiting, it was just, hey, here's an opportunity. That has been closed to us for the last 5 or 6 years. And there's been some misunderstanding, I think, about what that was, what that did. And it drastically changed what our membership is and has changed the membership from what our original charter was. So I just want to speak to the fact that I think we are all public schools and we should have access to the same schools. And just on a side note, the schools that we have traditionally gotten students from are overcrowded high schools in Granite School District. So thank you for listening. Thanks for the opportunity to encourage that this open sharing of students continues as it has for many, many years. It's only been in the last part of my career here at Ames that we have not been able to do that. And it's changed our demographics quite significantly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time this morning. Okay, and Kelly Booth, if you'll sign in and let us know who you represent.
Kristen, thanks. I represent the Northern Utah Academy for Math, Science, and Engineering, really known as New Ames. We opened the same year, the same year as Ames. Early College Charter High School started with the founding partners, the local school districts, Ogden, Weber, Davis. And it actually was written into our charter that we would send out public notice to the 9th graders of those school districts to invite them to come to an information night to hear about New Ames. And so I'm here to give a testimony. It's been a great working relationship. It works. For almost all but 20 years, we have had that in place with those school districts. The times we haven't gotten the lists are when there seems to be a new superintendent. Like, for instance, I think it was Brad Smith, when he took over for the superintendent in Ogden, he wouldn't honor the request and wouldn't honor the charter. And so that was a year we had to go to a mailer, and we just did a mailer to Ogden. But part of the mission for these early college high schools is to go after those students who normally would not have those opportunities, and to go after first generation learners. And so those years when we haven't received the mailers, like when we get the list, we send out, for example, Davis District, we send out between 6,000 and 7,000 mailers when we have the list. That's a school district of 74,000 students. So statistically, that's not even 1% of the list. And out of that, we're hoping to pull from Davis maybe 100 students, maybe 130 students, depending on what our graduating class is. So, but it's hard to plan when it's not predictable, because in the spirit of equity, with a mailer, you can demographically choose where you're sending those mailers. Well, when we're first generation and that's our mission, we have to go after every area in the county because we don't know where they're living. And so it was the year we didn't get it. I think we ended up sending out 30,000 mailers, and we got flooded with phone calls. We had like a postcard from a 70-year-old woman saying, I love the idea of your school, but I think I'm too old. And so the expense to the charter high schools, it's really not efficient for taxpayer money to go to mailers that are landing in people who aren't even school age. It's the other idea that it's ads. Whoever is spreading that is fear-based. These are not ads. It's public notice of a public school in your community, in the community, that is funded by taxpayer dollars that come out of Utah households. And the great thing about that notice is it allows for equity of choice. And we all know, right, that we need that right now, because a lot of students can be successful in a smaller school or a smaller class size, and vice versa. So we're not going for those kids that will be successful in a high school of 3,500. We're looking for the kid that needs the class size of 23 to be successful. And in turn, it creates a safer environment for everyone. You know, students are in public ed for 13 years if you count kindergarten, and yet we hope they're going to be contributing members of society after that. Well, the safest place for all of us is to find a system where the students don't feel like the system let them down. And when students have choice, that creates safety. And when students can find success, that creates safety. And when students have opportunities, that creates safety and equitable opportunities. And so we are more diverse than Davis District. We are more diverse than Weber District. We're not quite as diverse as Ogden, but that's also a district that hasn't shared their mailing list with us. So any questions that I can answer? I love pushing Utah education forward. I love working with the school districts. We have a great relationship with them, but I do think a lot of what this simple request, it's kind of turned into something that it's not. So it's really public notice of a public opportunity for education in your neighborhood.
Thank you so much, Kelly. We appreciate your input as well. Having heard this public comment on action item 1.2, we close the public comment and we will open it up to the action item and discussion of that by board members. This is for our 277-487 public school confidentiality and disclosure amendments. And we will be hearing in just a minute from our Director of Law and Professional Practices, Ben Rasmussen, but I wanted to acknowledge that our Board Chair, Jim Moss, signed on, and so has Committee Member Christina Bogus. I'd like to turn just a minute over to Chair Moss and then to Committee Member Bogus to introduce themselves.
Hello, Chair Moss here, Jim Moss. I'm doing double time at PEA up on the hill, so thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for the minutes that you can spend with us. Okay, Committee Member Bogus.
Well, apparently, oh, there we go. Thank you, Chair. Christina Bogus, I represent Taylorsville, Kearns, West Jordan, and happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Appreciate that. All right,
Thanks,
with
Chair.
with that, we will then turn the time now to Director Rasmussen.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. If we could, we actually would like to invite Greg Connell to go through the 4 different drafts that the committee has to consider. He's taken the lead on putting those together, and then we have Katie Chalice here also, and we can answer any questions you have after he goes through those, if that meets with your approval.
It sure does. Thank you very much. Okay, let's hear first from Greg Connell, our analyst.
Hi, thank you, Greg Cannell, policy analyst for Utah State Board of Education. What we have here for you today are 4 different drafts of a similar rule as requested by the committee. We have 2 drafts that have to do with the state board as being the primary receiver and sharer of information, and 2 drafts where LEAs would be the primary receivers and sharers of information. So draft 1 you'll find is an opt-in option where the Utah State Board of Education would be the receiver and sharer of student information. Draft 2 is an opt-out option where USBE would also receive that information and share out to LEAs upon request. And then we have draft 3, which is one of our LEA to LEA options. This would be an opt-out option where LEAs would honor data requests of those students who have not opted out. And draft 4 is an opt-in option where LEAs would honor the data requests of other LEAs for those students that have opted into sharing this data. In all 4 options, we put in protections that this student sharing data would only be used for the purposes of what we heard in public comment today, LEAs receiving information from other LEAs or from the USBE on students that they could then provide that notice to. And we are happy to take any questions, Chair Norton.
Great, thank you.
If I could just highlight a couple other things, Chair.
That'd be wonderful. Appreciate that.
So just so the committee members know that there's a couple things that are universal to all 4 of these drafts, that we've added a couple of definitions. So if you see that, you'll see this definition of student contact information on your screen. That would be universal in each of the 4 drafts. That's the contact information that we would anticipate is being shared here: student name, mailing address, and grade level. And then the different language in each rule is going to be at the very end of the rule. It's I think we've added a section 10 to each rule, if I remember correctly. Yeah, section 10 that kind of goes through the details for each option. So we're happy to answer any questions you have about the different options. That's what we've got.
And it does look like we do have a question from Committee Member Straight.
I cannot get my video to work. So I hate to make comment without my face being there, but if you'll oblige me, I did have a couple questions. Is that
Go right
okay,
ahead.
Chair? Okay. So yesterday, USSA, or was it, there was some concerns about advertising. Did I get that concern right, or was that the concern in that they offered?
There, we have not heard about advertising yet.
Okay, so you remember in public comment, we had a representative of the superintendents. Am I misrepresenting what their concern was?
Was that Lexi Cunningham?
Yes.
I don't remember. I didn't hear what she said, but she did give public comment.
Okay, I didn't have time to re-listen to that. So I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to make certain that we take into consideration all voices.
I just, I wrote down in my notes that she did comment about concerns she had for data sharing for advertising.
Okay. The other thing we talked about last time, and we have the 4 drafts in front of us, is there any remuneration for the supplying of data? Because I know we talked about that last time.
We did not include any provision on remuneration in the drafts.
So all we are showing here is just, this is what it would cost the entity to provide that. Is it open for them to negotiate? Is that an option for remuneration? And maybe that's a question for purchasing. I guess
You
the
know-
purchase would be the merchant.
Because I definitely want there to be the ability, I want fairness, and from my understanding, from what I've been told, to go out and buy a list of or the data. The data is not as good, and there's a lot of financial resources spent by the LEAs to get the data from the districts. I should say the charter school LEAs. But yeah, so we had this discussion. In fact, we spent quite a bit of time talking about what would be the fairest way to bring this about. And I thought we would have that in there somewhere. I'll listen to others. Maybe they have some better thoughts, but anyway, want to move this forward.
Thank you very much, Member Straight. Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I think I'll just say what I expressed before. I think we need to be careful with personally identifiable information. You know, there's got to be a way. I'm reading Member Phillips' email, and she's saying that, you know, there is a low cost option, which is an opt-in rather than an opt-out. And you know, I think I'd be more comfortable with that. I am trying to remember from our district representatives if they had what exactly I thought that she said, that they would also prefer that USBE take the brunt of the administration on this and not the LEAs, but I can't remember. I'm trying to find that out right now.
Okay, thank you. Chair Moss.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to address, Dr. Cunningham brought up some really good points. I think, first of all, if it's not an opt-out, then it kind of defeats the point of spreading notice of our public school options, but that does come with concerns, and I think she raised some good ones. Number one, you know, we don't want this going to commercial entities. It needs to be distinguished from like ads from, you know, somebody who's looking for money. I think also, you know, where do you draw the line? Is it public or also private? I think my understanding it's limited just to public charter schools, which keeps it within, you know, the system that already has other public options that people are aware of. And I also agreed with that last point that if USBE is going to do it, we should own it and make sure it doesn't impose a burden. We could put together documents, for example. So not having a great connection, I can't see the difference between 2 and 3, but I think one of those would work best to really give notice, as Director Booth up at New Ames talked about, but also give the safeguards we need. So thank you.
Okay, I too had those very same questions down, and I think that we would definitely need to ensure that those are set up. I also have a question of who sets up the protection for this. You know, once we share this, would USBE or the LEA still have the requirement, you know, if this data is shared beyond that, you know, who then owns that problem? The other question that I have, and maybe this is best asked by our Director of Privacy, Katie Chalice, and that is, can USBE share this data since we received it from LEAs for a purpose of record keeping and the financial end of things, as well as law and license, as well as teaching and learning, graduation, et cetera? Is this our data to share out to others?
Yeah, thanks for that question. This is Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. I think that, so every option that we've provided for you is within the law of FERPA and student and Utah statute. But I would argue that is a kind of a philosophical question that the board, you know, will need to grapple with. I will say, especially with the addresses, collecting addresses for district students, USB has long collected addresses for students attending charter schools. Collecting addresses for students attending school districts is relatively new within the last 4 years or so. And USBE did communicate with the LEAs, the districts. They were concerned about sharing that information, and we assured them that those addresses would only be shared to determine, they would only be used to determine eligibility for free or reduced lunch and other programs. So I want to acknowledge that, like, I give you guidance from a privacy perspective. I realize that is only one of many variables going on here. But yeah, that I think that's something you'd want to keep in consideration, is that this would be a diversion from what we an assurance that we made to the school districts when we started collecting that information.
Thank you. We've got another question from Chair Moss. Or maybe Chair Moss.
Sorry, I'm sorry. No, I'll drop my hand.
Okay,
Apologize.
I was just thinking, you've kind of got a lot of balls you're juggling right now, so I wondered if that was the situation. All right, at this point, committee members, I don't see any other questions. We do not have, oh, yes, Committee Member Bogus.
I'm trying to get back to my agenda. Is this an action item or a discussion item today?
This is an action item.
Okay.
Committee Member Bogus, you have your hand up?
Yes, ma'am. I'm looking at draft 2 and draft 3, and I am switching back and forth. And I'm specifically looking at the final lines, which is where the meat of these two drafts are. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe I just keep going to the same draft, but I don't see any difference in the language. And so I'm just wondering what the difference in the language from perhaps, I think it's line 270 on, is in draft 2 and 3, because I see on the gridded document that there's a significant cost difference on the front and the back end. And so I just am wondering if someone could articulate that, because maybe I'm not finding it. Maybe I need better glasses.
Committee
Yeah,
Member
Chair.
Bogus, go ahead, yes.
So, Board Member Bogus, if you look, it's the distinction is who is going to share the information. So this is draft 3, which if you look in the header, it says LEA opt-out. So on line 275, you see an LEA upon request from another Utah LEA shall share the student contact information. So the difference is going to be for draft 2 is it's going to be the superintendent will share that information. So I'll scroll down here on draft 2, and you'll see on line 277, the superintendent shall, upon request from an LEA, share contact information. So the only difference between 2 and 3 is who shares that information, whether it's staff here at USBE as the superintendent, or whether it's the school districts as LEAs would share that information under draft 3.
Thank you. And I appreciate that, because I guess I didn't look at that far. I'm just looking at the crux of the language. So I appreciate that, Director Asmussen. I have no further questions. I do have a motion when Member Davis is finished.
Okay, and then I have some questions still too. So go ahead, Member Davis, Vice Chair Davis.
I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, okay. Two more questions. Well, one question that I have and then one clarification that I would like. When a public charter school requests this information, are they getting the whole state or is this information limited to their geographical area?
That they would be able to define that parameter. So online schools could ask for the whole state, but Miss Booth's charter school probably wouldn't want to ask for the whole state, but they would have that option, I think, under the language of the rule.
And that's why the sliding scale on the cost.
Director Chalice, that would probably be for you.
Yeah, I think two things going on there. One is probably the biggest reason for the sliding scale is just we just don't know how many requests would come, how many charter schools would be interested in taking advantage of, this newfound opportunity.
Thank you. And then the other thing I just wanted to clarify is there was a part of our public comment this morning said that this was not for advertising, but line 280 specifically says that the only thing that the only purpose is for advertising, the way I read this, where it says for any purpose other than advertising. So it says they may not use student contact information for any purpose other than advertising. So it appears to me that it is for advertising. The public.
Ma'am, may I? Sorry, I can't get my hand up.
Yes. Member Straight's ahead of you and then we'll go with you.
Thank you.
Member Bogus. Member Straight?
Yes, it says the picture issue is on your end, not mine. But moving on from that, so am I to understand that potentially an LEA has policy in place by their board that you cannot give out data based on advertising? Is that a possibility based on what the concern was yesterday, or is that an unknown?
I have that from some of the LEA, the district LEAs that I've received from some larger ones that have said that that's specifically in their policy.
So I guess I have a question. I believe personally that we should share this information, but I wonder if we have the authority to tell the LEAs that they must. Any response to that?
If I may, Chair.
That's who I would hope would. Thank you, Director Rasmussen.
Yeah, Board Member Straight, that's a good question. I think the Utah Constitution gives the Board of Education direct supervision and control over K-12 education. And I think inherent in that would be the authority to direct a district to do this kind of thing.
Okay. But then local control, is that a principle? Or that's not protected in law, so that's a principle, is that correct?
It's not absolute.
Yes, that is correct. So that's kind of our decision. I know that we specifically asked for a better understanding of what the value was of that information. And that, I don't see where that has been provided. Having all these issues come together, I want to accomplish the goal of giving the charter schools the data they need. They're public schools. They need the data. I guess for some reason they can't generate that themselves. They're spending lots of resources that can go to student instruction and other uses to get lists, which aren't very good. And so I want to be helpful here, but I also want to respect the traditional public schools. And so I guess where I'm falling, which draft is it that has USBE provide the data?
So drafts 1 and 2 would have the USBE providing the data. And then draft 1 is if you want the opt-in option, draft 2 would be the opt-out.
Okay. So for me, that would solve the issue, if we provide the data, I know it might take us a little bit of time to build that up, but if we provide that, then we take on the responsibility, we take on the liability, and we don't push it off on our LEAs. Anyway, I'll listen to what others have to say now.
Thank you. Board Member Bogus, I know you said you had a motion. I've got some other questions. Do you have a question?
No, I have a comment though, but I think it would be better to hear you guys out. Thank you.
Okay, let's go then to Vice Chair Davis, and then we'll go to Chair Moss.
Hi, thanks. I personally feel better about an opt-in option. I think parents and families should be in control of who gets their data. And a lot of families are looking for options and want to explore every option available for their kids that they love and adore. But regardless of whether it ends up to be opt-in or opt-out, if USBE was going to take this on, how would we how would that happen? How would we just like send an email to every parent in the state and say, opt in if you would like to learn about lots of educational options for your student and have schools contact you, please click this form? Or would we send an email to the whole state and say, we are going to be sharing your information with several schools that have options for your kids to attend. If you don't want these, click this form to opt out. Is that how logistically either of those would work?
Chair, may I?
Please.
So if you look in each of the drafts, you'll see that the LEA is going to handle the opt-in and opt-out process at their level, regardless of who is giving out the information. So I've got draft 1 on the screen, which is the USBE opt-in option. And on line 271, you'll see the LEA has to establish, each school district would have to establish an opt-in process for sharing the student contact information. And then they would pass, for the parents that opt in, they would pass that information along to USBE through UTREX. And then when we get a request, we would be able to see who had opted in through their LEA. And that's how we would determine how to give out the information.
And may I follow up?
Please.
I mean, if basically our LEAs are saying, look, if you're going to do this, then you do it. Is there a way for us to do it? I mean, why do they have to do it? I get that maybe it's easy in a registration process because someone emailed, one of the charter directors emailed and said, how will they know they can opt in? And I guess that would force them to have to see it, if they were registering for school. But then it also creates that, concern about, why are we involved in this process from some of the LEAs. So I guess I'm just trying to process those questions and to see if there is a way that USBE could reach out to all the parents and in one mass move and say, hey, do you want these opportunities, and have people sign, or vice versa? Do you want to opt out?
Vice Chair Davis, I see that Director Bruff has his hand with data. Maybe he's got some answers for you here, or maybe he has comment on something else.
Yes, Aaron Bruff, Director of Data and Statistics. Thank you. And just to address Member Davis's question. So the question, as this was discussed, is who actually interfaces with the parents? And to answer the question, as we talked about options, could USB set up a methodology to connect to all parents? The answer is sure, we could approach that. However, USBE does not, when I say USBE, the agency here does not interact with the parents that much with registration. It's a very small number. So if as we discuss this, the opt-out, opt-in option really is, okay, who's the closest? And it is the LEA. they're the ones who get that or do that interface with all parents based upon who's registering within the schools. And that's the, as we talked about it, the most efficient and potentially the only effective way to get this information, either the opt-in or the opt-out process, is directly during that registration, who is communicating with the school during that registration period. And that's when that would take place. The updates, then, if you will, that flag or that information then would be shared, again, depending on which option we go with, shared to USBE, and then we would administer the distribution of the information after the fact, or going with the other two options, it would be the LEAs would then contact directly to the LEA, and then they would distribute that information. It's clear in my head. I hope that helps. Does that answer the question of why we put this way and say, why didn't USB just say, we will do it for you? It's just, we just don't have access to that information. Does that help?
Chairman, may I follow up?
Please, yeah.
Okay, so the LEA collects the information at registration, but then they're done. They give it to us, and the other LEA, whether a district wants the charter's information or the charter wants the district's information or whatever, then they come to USBE and we give them that. The only thing they have to do is put the box on their registration form, and then they don't have to mess with it administratively after that. Because that info is
Process,
automatically
yes.
going to come to
Yes.
us.
Yeah, other than a processing component. So there's, yeah, it's basically, like I said, it's a box or something of that nature saying, I am opting out or I am opting in, depending on which choice you want to go with. That would go along with the registration. Again, LEAs get the address at registration time. That's when they get the information, and would go along with that saying, I want or I don't want to be involved with this, however that's going to work. And then, yes, you're correct. You program it within the process, and then it would flow to USBE if we go with the option that USBE does it. If we don't go with the option to USBE and you go with the other options, the LEAs, and the LEAs would just maintain it within their own systems, and then as a request came, they would have to address it.
And how much would it cost for USBE to do it? We've already been through this, right? We don't know.
We have a list of estimated costs on whoever's driving. Thank you.
Because I mean, if we're going to do
Let's
this,
make it from 78 to 1.5 million. Oh, sorry, that was LEAs. 117 to 1.5. Or total of 187 to 1.6.
and how much would it cost just to send a mailer with the link to a website with all of the choices available every year out to a mass mailer? Is it going to cost more than $1 million? Seems like a lot. I'm okay. I'm fine if parents want the information for kids for their schools, and I hope we don't underestimate parents. I think a lot will want it. I just think they should be able to choose to get it.
I have a question with the registration process though, and maybe I'm not familiar with the secondary system, but are they filling out a new registration every single year? I know in the elementaries they're not. So if they wanted something going into an intermediate or middle school charter, if they filled that out in kindergarten, that's the last date that, that's the most recent address. And they wouldn't have a box on it this year. So, I mean, are we going to require every child to re-register so that we can now get that box marked? So,
If I may.
Yes, go ahead.
The answer is, it depends, right? Depends on the SIS and how that system works. If it is an opt-out option, then you would have to make it available both have to have it during registration, because we look at this as an annual process. I don't think you can opt in or opt out
For the rest
from
of
here
the
for eternity. typically we deal with the school years, right? Every year we have that option that we go through. So a lot of times when you do registration, if the student is already there, that information can automatically be populated, utilized. You don't have to go through and fill that all out, right? Typically, but if you move or if your address changes or you register a new place, whatever, that information flows through. You have to make it available, and that's just the registration process. So the data, again, through interoperability flow. But what's being presented here is each year is the parent needs to have that ability to do one or the other, to say, yes, share this, or no, don't share this, depending on how we want to approach it. Hopefully I answered the question.
Thank you. Okay, Chair Moss.
I'm sorry, gosh, I can't get off mute. I think I was going to bring a motion, but I will defer. I understand maybe somebody else has a motion teed up. I just want to say in support of the opt-out, this is not profiteering. This is not breaching some wall, letting outside vendors come in. This is the public school system, and kids who are part of an LEA are part of the Utah public education system. So this is simply sharing those options within the public system. And I think we need data controls, but I think if it's an opt-in, they're not going to be aware of it. I know how that works. I only opt into things that jump out and I say, I really want that. The point here is to let them know that there are choices, and it's only public school choices. It also applies to our internal public school choices with the districts. So I suppose I was going to move for number 2, but I think number 3 is also, I guess, as I understand it, is number 3 and an opt-out. Can I just ask for clarification? Because I'm only looking at the front sheet.
So draft 2, if I may, is the opt-out with USBE providing data. Draft 3 is opt-out with LEAs providing data themselves.
And can I just ask then, I mean, do either of those have better data privacy protections, one versus the other? Or do they both allow us to protect that data with the appropriate protocols?
Chair, I can respond to that if you'd like.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Chair Moss, because, and admittedly, in my role, I am a little bit biased in favor of data privacy, but I'll share with you one potential risk with draft 2, which is that currently, and Director Breff can attest to this, we receive a lot of data requests. USB has a lot of student data, and currently, unless the study is related to a program that we're providing or a study or evaluation or an audit, I am able to, decline those options. If USB gets in the business of collecting a directory information opt-out indicator, it will open us up to a lot of other requests for a multitude of reasons. I think the board would still have the discretion to choose, but it just will open us up to something that we've been automatically able to decline. And I've been in consultation with the privacy folks at the Department of Ed, and they expressed concern about this. They said about option 2, that it would be uncommon. Most states, very few states have a directory opt-out indicator. So that's, again, admittedly biased.
Okay.
That's one option. Another benefit to draft 3 over draft 2 is that the LEAs can maintain a little bit more control. I'll give you an example. Alpine District, their local board has firmly decided that they do not want to consider mailing address as directory information. If the committee and ultimately the board went with draft 3, it would allow Alpine to still do an opt-out option, but while also maintaining a separate documentation for their broader use of directory information. So definitely a downside for labor costs. It would be more work for LEAs, but privacy costs, I would argue option 3 is better from a privacy perspective.
And could I follow up, Chair?
Yes, thank you.
I think given the balance of considerations, I'd like to move that we recommend draft 3 if that's appropriate, unless that's premature, Chair.
That is fine. Great. Thank you. Unless that was what Christina Bogus was going to do because she had asked first.
Well, I will hold then. Sorry.
let
No,
me
no,
just-
I'll hold the motion.
No, go ahead and move it, Chair Moss. That's fine. I would just move to amend his motion, Chair.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Chair Moss, then we'll go with an amendment.
Okay, so the motion is that we adopt and recommend draft 3 for data sharing. Sorry, I can't even read the screen. Did I get that close enough to be? Let's see, here we go. That the Finance Committee approves R277-47, Public School Confidentiality and Disclosure, draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay. Now. Committee Member Bogus.
Thank you, ma'am. I am looking in particular at line number 272.
Okay, we'll wait just for a minute for Cami to get caught up there and before we proceed. Or whoever is running this ship right here.
And
We're good.
Okay,
And I'm going to talk a little bit because I would like Director Chalish to chime in on this, if possible. I would love to amend just a simple amendment in line 272 that an LEA shall establish an opt-out process and advertise that process. A lot of times it exists, but nobody knows about it. And but the appositive or the introductory phrase there, in accordance with FERPA, well, FERPA doesn't require you to advertise your opt-out process. It just requires you to have one. So would the amendment, if I could direct a question to Director Chalice, would the amendment be better in that sentence or to create a number 3 that they have to purposefully notify parents of an opt-out process, like purposeful promotion of an opt-out process? Could you answer that question for me, Director Chalice? If
Can
if
I
you
can I
understand
jump
it?
in on that one?
yes.
Oh,
Director
please go
Rasmussen
right
first,
ahead.
and
I'm
then
I'm
we'll
not the
have-
chair, sorry.
From a rule writing standpoint, I think we could easily add a number 3 that says something that the LEA shall advertise the opt-out process in subsection 2, or however you want to word that. But I think that from a smooth reading standpoint, I think it would be best to add a new paragraph after 273.
May I,
Okay.
Chair?
And Director Chalice, would you like to weigh in on any specific language that we would want to include?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, this is an interesting proposal. It's a little, so LEAs are required to give parents notice of their opportunity to opt out of directory information disclosure currently. But I think, Member Bogus, to your point, that's often done, that's not always done in a like in your face kind of way. Sometimes it's included in a student handbook. Sometimes it's common that it's a notice on the page at the moment of registration, but a parent would have to click the link to even view the notice. So I think the direction is good, but we would need to, in order to make a change from what's currently happening, I think the board would need to choose like more specific direction than just providing notice, because that notice is already being given, just maybe not in the way that Board Member Bogus.
Well,
I
I'm
think
Oh, go ahead, Member Bogus, this is your question.
I apologize, Chair Norton. Sometimes when I'm in a room alone by myself, I just talk readily to the computer. I would like it to state shall advertise to parents. So for example, and maybe that's not the right language, maybe Director Rasmussen can help me with that language. But to notify parents is different. So for example, they could send a text message. You can opt out of directory information. To do so, click here. Nobody knows what that is. Most parents don't have a clue what directory information is. And the delivery, we all know that the delivery and the open stats on electronic notification. I would like for it to be something where it's purposeful. You have the opportunity to opt out of directory information. Directory information is, in order to prevent your information from going to third parties, which may include local charter schools. I could think of about 75 things right now, but they would have to list that and then give them the opportunity of opting out of, I like the word promote. Thank you, Ben. Something that it's purposeful. It's not just a notice, it's a purposeful notice of not only what it is, but what it contains. And then the options for not participating. Because I share some of Member Davis's concerns about information going to different places and spaces. Chair, I would let you ask your question. Thank you. Well, you know what I mean. I apologize for the way I framed that. Go ahead.
No, I just have had a second thought come up about this with the opt-in, opt-out. And that is, I mean, I'm really, really careful with my data as far as I know about what I will opt in and opt out. But I can see many parents wanting two choices. I don't know that they would necessarily just want to opt out of all directory, because there's reasons that the school will have, you know, directory information. Maybe, you know, the choir, they want to have a list of the choir students and their phone numbers and, you know, they're traveling, whatever, but they don't necessarily want all the advertising, or they, you know, they don't want this information shared with outside public education. You know, they don't want that advertising. So I think in-school directory is different than sharing directory. So I almost wonder if they would even need to take it a step further, but I could be wrong.
May I, Chair?
Please.
I think in response to that, I think that, and Katie can correct me if I'm wrong, but in establishing the opt-out process, the school could break down what people choose, what they're opting out from. It doesn't just have to be one blanket opt-out of all directory information. They could opt out for certain purposes, depending on how the LEA wants to set that up.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Director Chalice.
Thanks. I think so. Ben is right that they have the option to do that. Most of the LEAs do not break out the option simply because of technical limitations. So they would need to collect and maintain that separate opt-out nuance within their student information systems. So that's a consideration. But yeah, it's occurring to me not to get too involved here, but it is occurring to me that one option the board could consider is in rule requiring a fundamentally separate opt-out process that is unique from the broader directory information opt-out.
Okay. Board Member Bogus, have you had an opportunity to look over that motion? Is that reading the way you would like it to read?
Yes, ma'am. I do like the suggestion of putting the word actively in there. I would ask if I could question or query Director Rasmussen. Actively notify, actively promote. I think actively is this idea. I also enjoy Director Chalice's thing of maybe adding another line in a second amendment to differentiate between regular directory information and this kind of directory information. I don't know. I think I want to deal with what you articulated in a second motion. But I do share those concerns. But I think actively promoting the opt-out process. And when I say promote, I don't know that maybe that's the right word, ma'am, because I don't know that I want them to promote opting out. I want them to promote the option.
Is it notify? Communicate?
Actively communicate. I like communicate, yes. Because they could send the same notification over and over again. And hopefully this would not be something that comes to nefarious ends, right? I would hope that, but I think just actively communicating what this is through different avenues and different communication systems would allow parents to stay in the driver's seat of that. And with that, I don't think I have any more to say at this time.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Davis.
Yeah, I'm gonna speak to all these motions. I would be a no on these because I think parents have the right to be able to say, I am interested in having a lot of information sent to me about other school options or not. But I would entertain draft 1 if someone wants to move that, if by chance something doesn't pass here.
Thank you. Okay, both of you still have your hands up, or do you have additional questions or comments?
I'm sorry, ma'am. Sometimes that just takes so much
No,
time.
I
It's
know.
harder to
Well,
do.
it's just not the first thing on your screen you look at.
Well, and I don't know, maybe there's a way to get this bar to stay up. It used to stay up and now it disappears.
Committee Member Straight.
There we go.
You're muted.
Yeah, if I go to line 264 here through 8.
Is this a substitute? Nope, it's not a substitute. It's just amending the amendment.
Well, so we have this reference to rule that already exists regarding data security and privacy training for educators, right? And this has been in place since 2018, according to line 267. So in regards to the safety of data, there has been strong efforts to promote data safety. And many parents are very actively engaged in just that one thing. And so I'm worried about this added one more burden onto the LEAs in regards to data and the protection of it. Now, this idea of actively the opt-out sounds like opt-in. So, and I think that may have a very positive connotation to it. And we have talked about transferring the responsibility and the liability for the safety of that data as being part of the agreement between the different LEAs. I agree with that. So what is the difference between actively promoting the opt-out process and having opt-in? I'm trying to understand what the difference between those two things would be. Thank you.
Dr. Rasmussen, could you address that?
Well, I mean, one is basically telling parents that you're taking specific efforts to tell parents that they can opt out and don't have to receive the information. With the opt-in, you're giving them the option. The parent has to opt in. So I think that's the basic difference. I'm not sure how to explain it.
Does it transfer liability
To who?
to either the parent or the receiving entity? If I'm an LEA and I feel like I'm protecting your data, but now you just said I could share your data, does that mean I'm no longer liable if that data is breached? Because you opted into the share?
Yeah, I
can-
think so. I'd probably want to do, there might be some research needed there as far as what liability is involved. Katie?
Yeah, I can speak to that, Chair, if you'd like.
Thanks.
I would say the liability remains the same for the LEA in terms of protecting the data. So even if the parent had not opted out, if there was some kind of breach or misappropriate use of that data, that liability would still fall on the LEA. So I would say the liability is not offset, but the requirement to act is offset. So in an opt-out, this goes to your question, Member Straight. In an opt-out option, the parent would need to actively take an action to make their opt-out option known, whereas in an opt-in,
Yeah.
Okay. I'm
in.
tired from last night. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry. But yeah, an opt-in would be if the parent does not take action, then the default is that it would not be shared.
Chair, if I may,
Yes.
let me give you an example, because I think everyone's seen this. You have a form, let's say you're going on a website, and then at the bottom there's check boxes, right? And they're saying, do I want to receive a mailing list? And you see that, like advertisings or whatever, the default is checked. So if you're not paying attention, you're like, do I want to receive, additional information from this company? Default checked is there. That is, then the opt-out option would be, it's defaulted to be yes unless I take action, and unclick that. The opt-in would be, the default is it's not checked, and I would have to click it, say, yes, please give that to me. So that's an example of, this process of what a parent would see during, if we will, registration period. I want my information to be shared. Is that checked or not checked? Opt out is it's checked. I want to click it and remove that. Opt in is it's not checked and I have to click it to have that information flow through. So that's kind of, if you will, the UI design of, okay, how would that work within a screen, and how do we want this to kind of play through? Hopefully that kind of helps visualize during registration what a parent would see and how you would respond to it.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, seeing no other hands. Go ahead, Member Straight.
Sorry. I really like that example. To opt in means you actively make a choice of understanding that you are providing the data. In an opt out, the box is already checked, making the choice for you unless you choose otherwise. It's a very fine line of difference, but it does make some difference. So I do have as a priority the idea in my mind that I do absolutely want parents to have the choice. And I want our our public schools who are charter schools to get the data they need, but I want to also balance that with the protection of their child's data and the rights of parents. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. Thank you.
Okay. So just to clarify, if draft 1 opt in for USBE or draft 4 opt in for LEAs, that would make the parent check the box that says please share. Is that correct, Director Asmussen or Director Bruff, excuse me?
Those are opt-ins, so yes, the parent would have to check the box.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right. Oh, we got more questions again. Vice Chair Davis, thank you.
Thank you. Gosh, I'm having such a hard time because
And can we get the motion back up on the screen? Go ahead, Member Davis, sorry.
Our LEAs want to be just, many of them, totally hands off on this thing. I don't think that's realistic. I mean, I think they're going to have to collect the information. On the other hand, it seems wrong for me to make a decision that all this private information is going to go out if people haven't, had a choice to, when I register for my kid at school, I'm assuming that the data is going to be used for all the things that the child is going to need to do at that school. I don't, anticipate it going somewhere else, although I wouldn't be opposed to having information about the others, but I want to choose that. So I have a substitute motion and I would move draft 1.
Point of order, we're at an
Yeah,
amendment.
we've got an amendment, so I don't know that we can take a substitute. Unless,
We only have one amendment, right? Or do we have more than
we
that?
have, oh, well, we have one amendment.
The
I
other
can-
amendment
there-
below that is just something I've drafted in
Okay,
case.
sorry, I saw
you-
2 amendments. We have one amendment. So
Can sub, right?
we can have one, yeah, we could sub.
So I would sub draft 1. It still requires the LEAs to collect the information, but it doesn't, but then, they're kind of out after that. But so that seems kind of like a middle ground there, and it allows parents to opt in to receiving all of the information for options for school choices, and they get to choose to receive that. And I think a lot will, personally.
Okay, so we are voting first on this substitute motion.
So point of order, we have to vote on the amendment and go back to the main motion before we can actually substitute a motion.
I
Thank
think
you.
the subs the whole thing. At least that's what Michelle told me last night, unless I misunderstood.
Director Rasmussen, do you want to,
It subs
I
the
think-
underlying and the
I
amendment.
think as the chair, you have the discretion to.
okay.
I think-
Then
Well,
let's
Well,
go.
if that's the case, then we broke the rules all over the place yesterday.
I'm simply saying that, Member Bogus, because then the committees, it's a lot less informal than it is in main board meeting. I think that if the committee agrees with Member Davis's substitute motion that we should move to draft 1, it kind of obviates the need to address the amendments because they don't apply to draft 1.
Chair, may I respond to that? I think it's consistent with yesterday that based on what I asked Michelle Buse. I mean, what it did was only allow a sub if there was only one amendment on the main motion, to my understanding. Unless I misunderstood it.
I'm thinking that I want to go with the substitute motion. If the substitute motion passes, we can be finished. If the substitute motion does not pass, then we can go to the amendment and then we can go to Chair Moss's motion. So we'll go in that order. So the motion that we are voting on now is that the Finance Committee approves R277-487 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board approval on second and final reading. Vice Chair Davis, did you want to speak to that?
No, like I said, I think LEAs want totally out. I think that's unrealistic. They've got to participate, but I think parents also should get a choice.
Okay, and I'm just going to speak to it. I think that parent data is critical. I think our system is based on data, and we have been so careful in our entity to protect that data, and that is when it is not even personally identifiable. You know, I've heard more data requests turned down than we have shared, and so I feel that, you know, to be sharing data, to hold on to that liability for that data. We all see data breaches by billion-dollar companies all the time, and I have received a lot of very strongly worded messages imploring me to not share parent data. I understand the point of the options, but I also know that, you know, mailers don't cost $1.7 million or $1.3 million. And that's if you send it to everybody in your, you know, geographical area. So I will be voting against this.
You're muted, Chair Norton. We didn't hear the last.
I'm so sorry, my whole comments. I was
We- We heard you say you're
Okay.
voting against.
I did say I'm voting against because of the data sharing and the liability. I know that billion-dollar corporations have data breaches, and I feel like this data is so valuable. And in it's just something that we have to protect. We protect it even when it doesn't have a name or an address on it. I see so often our board turn this down because we are protecting student data. And I feel like, this is a situation that it puts us in a tenuous situation to be sharing it, because it not only has their name on it, it has their address and other important information. Now, I'm sorry about that microphone situation. Board Member Straight.
Yes, thank you. I find myself in this situation where I agree with portions of what everyone has said. And, I think it is different in the sense that these are public schools. It's a unique relationship. It's a unique situation. Trying to be fair to everyone involved is the challenge. I think this draft one and the motion by Member Davis, I think it's a good middle ground. And I actually think even if a parent doesn't check the box, it makes them more visibly aware of those options that they may seek out at a later date. And some may not check it just because they don't want their data shared. And they still might go and pursue because now that information is in front of them. I think draft one is a benefit to everyone because it maintains the rights of everyone. Anyway, it's still a tough decision. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other hands, board members, please vote. Again, we're voting on the substitute motion to bring forward draft one. And it looks like that motion fails with a split vote. 2 members for, Straight and Davis, 2 members against, Norton and Bogus. Okay, that brings forward our amendment to amend the original motion that the committee add after line 273 on draft 3, an LEA shall actively communicate the opt-out process, subsection 2, through A, email communication to parents, and B, posting information on the LEA website.
Ma'am? Oh,
Yes,
sorry, I didn't get my hand. May I also add into that, if it's amenable to the body, that paper communication go out? The open rate on emails is not very high, and even the delivery rate on emails from schools is not very high.
is that, is there any objection from the body? Turn on your microphone if you have an objection.
What
Okay.
was that change? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Just to add to that, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am.
Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Just so, where the mouse is, the pink mouse, if you go up 2 lines to Member Bogus motion to amend, in that, I would love to have a paper notification, or something. To me, and this is again, to me, if we're allowing people to opt out, email, I don't know that mail, but paper, a note home with kids, something that says, this is an option. because the open rate on emails from schools is not very high and the delivery rate is also not very high. And though I love that it's on the website, the idea that a parent is going to go looking there for their privacy rights is probably not the most logical. I think it's good to include, but I think we need to actively communicate in multiple avenues. And so I would like paper to be one of those avenues. If they choose to send home cards like Granite School District sometimes does, I think that's their business. But with that, ma'am, I would stop talking.
Okay, so Committee Member Bogus, I see that that has now, without any objection from the group, it's been updated to say paper communication, then followed by email communication and posting information on the LEA's website. Will that suffice for your request?
Yes, ma'am. After I read it again, I'm wondering if we say digital communication so that LEAs understand they could send an email or a text message. However they want to do it is fine with me.
I think maybe more specific, these two. Well, it's your amendment.
I don't care, ma'am. I
Okay.
would leave it to the body.
Okay. Committee Member Straight.
So I'm not opposed to that. But I guess the challenge that I see is you send a postcard home with a third grader. I'm not sure what chance that has of getting there. I guess it may. It will in some cases, but my experience, even with high school students.
I was gonna say, it's better with a third grader than with an eighth grader.
Yes, that's probably so. This is quite the expense. And it appears from the motion, and maybe I'm misreading it, but it says the LEA shall actively communicate the opt-out. Wow, who is going, the LEAs bearing that burden, or do they invoice the requester? Then now the requester, are they paying more for that than they would anyway? I see some real problems with how this would be implemented, especially from the cost side. Anyway, thank you.
Vice Chair Davis.
That's actually a good question. Our universities pay for the data that they ask to collect from our schools. So that would be interesting to do some cost comparisons there. If a district's requesting from all the charters in the area, how much would they pay the charters to do that and collect that and give it to them, and vice versa. So anyway, I think that our LEAs, I think someone mentioned that there's already a requirement to provide information about opting out to parents. I just feel like now this is getting more and more doubling up on efforts that are already required and administratively, but I'm a no on the main motion, so that would make me a no on this anyway.
Okay, Vice Chair Davis.
I'm
All right,
finished.
you already went. For Committee Member Bogus.
Yes, ma'am. So to me, this doesn't actually add any cost. When you have a weekly email that goes out to your district, including this information in that weekly email, doesn't cost any more. If you have a teacher note that goes home that says, "Welcome to my classroom," and at the bottom of it, it says, "And FYI, directory information is a thing. It could be shared in these capacities." That doesn't cost any extra. Now, if we wanted to say actively communicate solely about the opt-out process, that could cost LEAs money. But as this is stated, I don't see an increase in costs for an LEA.
Okay. Director Bruff.
Thank you, if I may, just to help with understand what the cost estimates are and what they circle around is these are system updates to the SIS that were estimated saying, what would this cost for each LEA to go out and say, update your system so you've coded this new thing, and then it's the process control estimations of, okay, where will this impact? So is this just the SIS? Is this the SIS and the UTREX and then the USIM system, which is, you know, the work that just has to be done technically that floats through the system anyway. Those are where those cost estimates are coming from. So while there's no additional funds and it would be considered, this will be, you know, rolled into the normal work that people do, the cost were to show, okay, how many man hours, what kind of coding hours, what kind would you have to pay your vendor, the SIS vendor, to update this information they've collected. So hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you. Committee Member Bogus.
Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I apologize.
All right, so I'm seeing no other hands. The amendment before us is that the committee add line 273 on draft 3, which states, print 3, an LEA shall actively communicate the opt-out process in subsection 2, in the subsection 2 through A, paper communication, B, email communication, and C, posting information on the LEA's website. Committee members, go ahead and please vote. And we've received both a chat and I've received information from Chair Moss that he is a yes. And that looks like it has failed with 2 votes in favor, 3 against. The 2 in favor are Committee Member Bogus and Chair Moss. So we will go with the original motion that the Finance Committee approve R277-487 Public School Confidentiality and Disclosure Draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. Board members, if you will please vote. Okay, I'm not seeing anything from Chair. Let's see.
Chair Moss said in the chat that he was a yes on this.
Okay, Chair Moss is a yes, so we have 2 votes in favor. Member Straight, your vote is not there, and I thought I saw it. Okay, 2 votes in favor, 3 votes against. Voting against would be, voting for this would be Committee Member Bogus and Chair Moss. Okay, agenda item 1.3 has will not be heard today. If there's anyone that has been waiting for that, I apologize. Many of the people who are involved with this particular item are in PEA this morning, and so we will postpone that until March. We're going to be moving on to agenda item 1.4.
Chair,
Yes.
Board Member Straight has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Board Member Straight.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. So by moving on, we're just not sending a recommendation, but this goes to the full board. Is there still an option to get something out of the committee that we can agree on in regards to what would balance this request? Because personally, I would like to come to some type of agreement that would benefit all of our public schools, protect data, give the best option. Or is that not a possibility?
The board can
And
pick it
moving
up
on.
even if we don't put anything through from the committee.
So if it comes through as a board, I mean, if it, because we've heard it, what you're saying, Vice Chair Davis, is that if somebody makes a motion when we do the report out to bring that forward, that's a possibility.
Absolutely, yes.
So it'd be
It
more
should still
productive.
pass in
to-
full board. It just wouldn't come with a recommendation from this committee. But
Okay.
they can absolutely move one of these options and have 8 votes and it can go through just fine.
And you know what,
Yes.
that's probably more efficient because now we can start talking about what we can do in the meantime between now and next board meeting. So
Well,
I'm
and-
good with moving
And it,
on.
you know, and I think like you mentioned, to find a way to make this, you know, for both sets of public education, you know, both sides of that picture, but the parents, you know, to see how we can best serve them too. So I think that there's plenty more conversation that can be had and with the full board, but I thought we've done a good job getting that conversation started, and there's been some great questions asked. So thank you all for the work that you've done and the consideration that you gave to this. I think we've got a good start and insight to what's going on. All right, so we are now on item 1.4, which is a recommendation for bonuses. Is State Superintendent Sydney Dixon on with us right now?
Chair Norton, I believe
Yes.
she's in public ed appropriations.
Okay, then I think that it would be a great idea if I could turn the time over to you, Sarah. I know that we also have Assistant Superintendent of Operations, Deborah Jacobson. So who was planning to speak to this?
So I believe this is a board request. So if there's
Yeah.
an opportunity for a board member to speak to it,
Okay.
we'd be happy to answer any questions though, related to the request.
Okay. I will bring this forward then. Let me read the recommended action and then I'm going to speak to it. And then if you have any further questions. The recommended action is that the Finance Committee recommends that the Utah State Board of Education approve bonuses for eligible employees using balances from the tax delay funds not currently encumbered and not to exceed $5,000 per eligible employee, paying $2,500 for the next available pay period following and subject to board approval during the March 2024 Utah State Board of Education meeting, and only to employees who were hired on or before March 1st, 2024. And then an additional $2,500 if the employee is still employed with the Utah State Board of Education on June 30th, 2024. I would like to make a comment that, as we know, we have fought hard to help our local and our entity, the Utah State Board of Education, raise the boat up a little bit to make them even a beginning of competitive with what the rest of the world is paying. And then, you know, as we've seen and heard, and we're very happy that LEAs across the state have been able to give substantial pay raises and, you know, and so the boat was raised higher. I know that the State Charter School Board has just passed something like this for $8,000 for their employees. So what we're asking is not unheard of. And I think it would be a great value and a great show of appreciation and respect to our, you know, fabulously wise and experienced staff for all the work that they are doing as we keep this education train moving. So that would be my comment. I'm interested in hearing, or we need to hear other comments. Committee member Straight.
Yes, you know, I'd like to speak to institutional knowledge. Institutional knowledge has great value. I know working with a local municipality for 12 years that on the council side, the administrative side, that when we would lose one of our one of our employees, whether it be someone who had skills with a backhoe, snow removal, police, fire, that the replacement cost was enormous. Just the training costs, and then on top of that, the institutional knowledge that I mentioned earlier. There is value in understanding and being a part of an organization for a period of time. And you know, we need to keep our employees, and they need to know that they are valued. The only caution I have is that our number one priority should be to make that up. Somehow we've got to get some better compensation from the legislature. We've made it a high priority. We've done that now 2 years in a row. But we're struggling in that area. So I am absolutely in favor of this. I'm hoping that we won't have to keep doing this, that will actually increase their compensation more appropriately in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other,
Sorry, ma'am, I was
oh,
trying.
go ahead.
So I would just like to ask the question, what's the total fiscal note on this? Because my math is actually in the $2.5 million range. And so if that is not correct, I would like to know that. And maybe, I don't have a number pad here, so maybe I did it wrong. But if someone could tell me the total fiscal note on this motion, I would appreciate it, please.
Yes, I have an idea that Assistant Superintendent Jacobson could give us that information, or tell us who could give us that information.
Yeah, and it's actually on board, it's actually in the backups. You'll see your discretionary report. It's added in there as a pending action. It's $3,534,860. That amount does not only include the $5,000, but also the benefits that would be associated with that.
So Committee Member Bogus, that is the very last line on your discretionary fund sheet that was there. And I think when you pull it up, it's yellow, but when you print it off like I do, it's gray. Does that answer your question?
So sorry, it does, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, great. Vice Chair Davis.
Thank you. We've advocated for market adjustments the last few years from the legislature and additional FTEs, but we've, fallen short of those requests. I worry because our attrition is kind of crazy. And our employees can get paid more at the individual LEAs than they can through our state limitations. And it is just really hard. And we need great people to help give great services to the boots on the ground that are doing the work all over the state. So I would support this.
Okay. Seeing no, yes, Committee Member Bogus.
Sorry, ma'am. Can we put the parameters in the motion as well?
You want to amend the motion?
Well, yeah, I don't know if it's an amendment. There was a parameter list, and I don't see it here on the motion.
The parameters about when they are hired and the first round and the second round.
For example, there was a parameter that they can't be on an improvement plan. They cannot have a write-up. I'm just wondering where those parameters are.
Chair Norton,
Yes.
it's actually in the memo.
Oh.
And so this is based on an eligibility piece, that the employee would not be on a current performance improvement plan. The employee has not received a letter of written warning on or after January 1st of 24. And that they should have received a performance rating of 3 or higher on their FY23 performance evaluation.
So Committee Member Bogus, you would like that term eligible spelled out more specifically?
I think in the motion, yes, ma'am, I think it would help this not only get through the full board, but it would
Okay.
save some questions.
Then can we just copy and paste 1, 2, and 3?
That is fine with me, ma'am, yes.
Okay. All right, so the amended motion specifies that an eligible employee for the purpose of the bonus program is defined as an employee who meets the following criteria. 1, the employee is not currently on a performance improvement plan. 2, the employee has not received a letter of warning on or after January 1st, 2024. And 3, the employee has achieved a performance rating of 3 or higher on their FY23 evaluation. Are there any questions or comments to that amendment? All right, committee members, if you'll go ahead and please vote for that amendment. Vote for or against, or vote your thoughts on that amendment. Okay, it appears that has passed with 4 votes in favor and Chair Moss absent. So now we will go to the recommended action, and it's on your screen. Can you read that? Is that okay? Oh, Committee Member Bogus?
Ma'am, through the chair, I would like to ask Superintendent Jacobson, if my understanding is correct. So I'm looking at this form here, and I'm sorry it doesn't respond well today. So I believe the bottom line, Superintendent Jacobson, says that in our discretionary funds, after these bonuses, the board would still have $7.4 million. Would that be correct?
Now, are you referring up in the upper right-hand corner? In the remaining column, it would leave you $1.3 million.
Oh, okay. I apologize. It's so tiny on my screen. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just can't get the screen to work. Usually it does. I appreciate you clarifying. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, so you've got the recommended action as amended. Go ahead and vote if you haven't already.
Chair Norton, can I clarify who forwarded the motion on this one?
I did.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And that passes unanimously with 4 votes in favor. Thank you. All right, our next item is an informational item. This is agenda item 1.5, and it is the quarterly report for the School Children's Trust. We'll hear from Director Plant and assisted by Assistant Superintendent Jacobson as needed.
Hi, thank you, Chair Norton. In the last time I provided a report to this committee, you had asked that in our quarterly reports, we provide information about how the schools are spending their money. And I think people were quite interested in kind of some individual scenarios about different schools and how and why they're spending the money the way they are. And I would like to do that going forward, but I felt like it was important to start out for you to have some sense of the overall picture. And so that is what is in the backup that's been provided. And Cami, can you help me with those slides? Thank you. So we'll just talk a little bit about the academic areas that are identified and how schools have spent their money. This is, Erin would go crazy if I tried to tell you that this was comparable information, because it isn't. Over the years, the categories where schools could spend their money has changed, and the expenditure areas have changed. And so all we have is kind of some general data, but I think it provides a bit of a picture for you to see how schools, how it has changed over time. This first chart is a little bit busy, but you can see that reading, or language arts, as it's called now, has been the primary place, the number one place where funding has been spent over the years, followed by math, science, and then social studies and technology. So that has been pretty consistent. I don't have data for all years. I only have data for a few years, so that's what you're seeing there. You'll might question why the pink line keeps being longer than the others, and that is simply a result of some programming. And you learn that if you ask the question incorrectly, then you get the incorrect answer. And in some cases, we had schools that, for instance, if they selected language arts, they then selected every other category as well, with the thought process, if children read well, then they do well in everything else. So that's the reason you're seeing that pink line kind of jump out. If you'll go to the next slide then, Cami, then this one just indicates to you the 2020 data. I just barely received the expenditure data for 23. So this is 2022 information. It just indicates to you by school the academic areas that schools are selecting. And it doesn't add up to the number of schools in the state. And that's because schools can select more than one academic area if they choose to. But again, you'll see that those priority areas that are required in the law are the places where people are, where schools are spending their money. So if you'll go to the next one, Cami, please. This one I need to explain just a little bit. What I've done here to try and indicate to you how funds are being spent differently over time as needs change and as the available funding has increased. What you're seeing here is a category. It has the total amount of money that was spent those 3 years, and then it shows how much was spent for each year. So the point is that you can see that initially not a lot of money was spent on people. And that's because there wasn't really enough money to hire someone. The first couple of years, it was the expenditures were heavy in supplies and things, I guess is the right way to say it. Books, so support materials that help with instruction. So if you'll go to the next one, Cami, and I have to clarify that the number on this, the total, is incorrect. I only noticed that this morning. The total for the 2003 year is 7.6 million was the distribution. And I will correct that so that it's in the backup for my next report. The first year of the program was $5 million. So when I looked at that, I was like, that can't be right. I don't know where that came from. So you'll see here that as in the prior slide, it was a lot of consumables, a lot of general supplies and books, some technology, but not very much was spent on actual instructors. So we'll go to the next one, Cami. And this is sort of midway through, and you can see as the money increased and they had the ability to spend money on teachers, on aides, on reading specialists, on that kind of thing, the the amount of money that was spent increased there. Technology doesn't look necessarily like it increased here, but because the money is larger, the amount of money that was spent increased. If you'll go to the next one, and this is really the last slide, you'll see again that the expenditure for people, which is what you would expect in education, I think, that has increased again. Technology tends to be another area where a lot of money goes. But for a small school district that wants to help their students participate in opportunities to determine what they want to do after high school, transportation and fees and those kinds of things are very important to them. Even though in the overall expenditure, they don't tend to show up that as a large expenditure. So that the intent of this was just to give you a little bit of background so that you understand where schools are spending their money, as well as the academic areas where they're able to supplement the funding that comes through the legislature, how they spend their money. So if you have any questions otherwise, and I will correct that slide for my next report. That's my report.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions, committee members for Director Plant? All right. Looks like you got it all covered for us, Director Plant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Item 1.6 is also an information item. This is adding a priority academic area to school land trust. This is again from Director Plant and Assistant Superintendent Jacobson.
So this came as a result of a discussion you all had several months ago, and Chair Moss had asked if we should add an academic area, and that it was referred back to the Trust Lands Advisory Committee. We looked at it, we considered it, and there's a backup letter in there that indicates the reasons why their recommendation was not to add a priority academic area. And that is largely because it is the legislature that kind of set those priority areas. That 53 needs to have an H behind it, 53H-2-205. That's where you would find that reference. I remember in the discussion that Chair Moss was looking for it, and it is outlined in code, and that's the reason we've kind of stuck to that. It is important to know, though, that on the Trust Advisory Committee, that the principals and the school boards are felt like it's very important for them, for schools to be able to select a different academic other than those that the legislature has outlined. And schools do have the opportunity to do that as long, and then it's up to the local board to say, are you addressing language arts and mathematics first? Are you addressing those with other monies first? And then, yeah, we'd love to have you spend money on Beverly Taylor or otherwise. So it's very discretionary at the local level, which this is a local program. So the recommendation is that we not add another priority category to the rule.
Thank you very much for that extra information that you've provided. Committee members, at this time, this is not an action item, so we can't take an action, but that is something that if that is something that you would like to do, you can send that through board leadership with the two other people. We haven't obviously heard from Chair Moss as he's still away, but that's just to be on your radar.
I'm here, Chair.
Oh, you are here. Okay, go ahead. Did you want to speak to this?
I can be real quick. I appreciate the Trust Land folks looking at this. For my service on it, I know we've all served on community councils. And I think flexibility is a good thing. I think history has been maybe neglected in social sciences, but I appreciate the reasons for keeping to those priorities. So thank you for thinking through it, and it might be something to revisit in some other form. Appreciate though, kind of running that down and reporting back to us.
Thank you. I think it's educational for all of us every time we learn where all these various items come together. All right, we have agenda item 1.7, which is an information item. This is the mid-year update to the minimum school program. We'll be hearing from our coordinator, Dale Frost, and our finance director, Sam Uri.
All right, Chair Norton, Director Uri believes at PEA. So may I begin my presentation?
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, just looks like I am not able to share, so that's fine. Cami, do you want to bring up the?
Jill, you should be able to. I just stopped sharing, so you should have rights.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. This was a presentation we were going to give back. Let me make sure that it's showing. Chair Norton, is that showing full screen?
Yes, it is.
Great, thank you. We were originally going to give this presentation in your December meeting, and then that got pushed back to January, and that enabled us to update the numbers just slightly. The story didn't change, to address a few issues that came up after we published the mid-year updates. We corrected those, but this is the exact same that was in the January presentation. I was going to go, since these are changes that were made back in November, it's already been out there for quite a while. I'm going to go through fairly quickly and spend more of the time answering any questions you have, or can give back time to the committee if that works for you, Chair.
Great, thank you. So do we have any questions on this minimum school program and that mid-year update? Wow, they're really fast learners, Dale. Good job.
Would you like me to just give you the very highlights?
I would.
Okay.
That would be great.
So as I mentioned, in November, we updated data. So every year with the minimum school program, which accounts for 80 to 90% of the funding that schools receive, after the legislative session, we come out with what are called the legislative estimates. So you can see in 24 that happened in April. And then we just went through the mid-year update in November, well, just a few months ago. And that was to true up to actual enrollments, actual ADM counts, actual cactus counts are the major updates, but there are a few other data points there. But yeah, if there's one thing for you to take away from this presentation, it's that we base our initial estimates on projections, and then we true up to actuals once we have the data. So the formula and the funding, the final budgets that LEAs are receiving are based on actual students. I think this was presented back in November. But yeah, overall, our student enrollment counts went down by almost 1,900 students. I'm just going, sorry. Okay.
Wow, those projections and actual are so close.
We work really hard on those. I appreciate that. And we're not always this close, but we were pretty close. On the charter side, we were a little off. We were actually under, but overall, really, really close. On our actuals versus on FTE counts, actuals versus projected, So the total change between that was a little under 2%. So the FTE educator wise, those who qualify for ESA in this case, increased by almost 2%. So this large table here, if you get any questions about, what program and what data gets updated, this could be helpful for you. So for example, you hear there's been a lot of conversation about the hold harmless as it related to Tooele. And that's because if you look here on PPA and PPB, that's the kindergarten grades 1 through 12 programs. Those are based on 2 data points, the October 1 counts as well as the 23 ADM. And normally there's a prior year plus growth calculation that hold harmless. And the legislature in the base budget changed the statute for Tooele to not hold and any LEA that experiences a large drop because of a change in a contract. So I just wanted you to see that whole discussion is because there's 2 data points here. I wanted to point out for the field, for example, charter school local replacement is a big funding source for charter schools. That's just based on October 1 count. So there's no kind of prior year plus growth hold harmless on the charter school side. Happy to answer any other questions about specifics here. I wanted to get to, since this is finance committee, let's get to numbers and dollars. So there's a hand raised, Chair Norton.
Yes, Vice Chair Davis, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. I know you just mentioned the conversation about LEAs who have a significant reduction due to a contract. That's just in the conversation, right? It hasn't passed. The changing of that code hasn't passed, correct?
Chair, may I answer that?
Please.
Vice Chair Davis, it has passed because it was part of the base budget, which passed. And so it's still continuing conversation though, that change can be amended if the legislature choose to do so by the end of session. But as of right now, that part of the formula has been changed.
May I follow up, Chair?
Please.
So it's changed so that an LEA cannot recoup funds if the significant loss is due to a contract change, right? And in light of that, I don't want to birdwalk, but since you're bringing up Tooele, do we have a quick update or is that still up in the air?
Chair, can I answer to the extent
Yes.
that I know?
Yes.
Vice Chair Davis, I do not know any details on the negotiations and conversations about one-time funding for Tooele. I have no idea on that front, but I will say that the application of the legislation as it was passed in the basic school program doesn't specifically say a contract change. It says that we can hold them harmless for factors beyond their control, like natural student enrollment. And so to kind of give you a ballpark figure, of the 8,000 plus students that we're talking about with My Tech High, about 500 can be attributed to natural student change, demographic changes, and those sort of things. So we can hold them harmless for that small part. The question is the rest, and that would have to be a legislative one-time appropriation for that purpose.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other hands, go ahead.
So this, I like throwing big tables at you, and I apologize. So
Great.
This shows all the programs in the basic school program. Recall that when we talk about WPUs, the WPU is not just the grades 1 through 12 or kindergarten program. We often talk about those 2 programs as the WPU. All of these programs are made up of WPUs. Some are restricted, some are not. And so this just shows you kind of balances by program, that at the end of, after the mid-year update, we do have a shortfall in the basic school program that is primarily driven, if you can see in the middle, the special education add-on, that we were expecting significant growth, but we got even higher growth in our special education populations, which is causing a $14 million shortfall on that front. And let me also be clear that these numbers here do not include the prior plus growth calculation of Tooele. We did that, proactively to give them as much time ahead of time. So, yes, so this is, there would be, so going back to the conversation with Vice Chair Davis, there would be a small change in the grades 1 through 12 side, and I guess kindergarten side, about that new change that was for the natural enrollment growth. I guess there's a hand.
All right. Vice Chair Davis, do you have an additional question?
Just a question about the special education shortfall. So forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, but then who makes up for that?
Chair, may I answer that question?
Yes, please.
Chair, Vice Chair Davis. So the legislature has created a pot of money called the Enrollment Growth Contingency Fund. And in there, we can cover shortfalls in the basic school program. And there's enough to cover this, plus some deficits in other parts of the minimum school program. I'll kind of go into that detail. The issue was, going back to the Tooele issue, is that we had enough, it's somewhere in the $20 to $30 million range. So that will be able to cover that. So we don't have to ask for a supplemental, if that answers your question, or any kind of look for another funding source. We can cover that within the basic school program from that contingency fund.
Okay, very quick follow-up. This has been a consistent problem and concern, and our LEAs have repeatedly asked that we look or advocate for increases in special education, specifically in the self-contained area. So I just want to put that bug in people's ear, and that may become a conversation next year, but I just want to send it out to the universe.
May I add to that, Chair Norton?
Please, yes.
These increases that you're seeing in the special ed, and I'm not opining as to whether it's enough or not, but we are seeing increases on the WPU front from the change that was done a few sessions ago, House Bill 113, that changed the formula. And so we are seeing increases there, and that's what's driving a lot of that growth that we're seeing here. And then just natural growth in the special ed population. So it's both of those things. Special ed population is growing, and more of that population is generating WPUs on the growth side. So is it enough? I'm not going into that conversation because I don't know the answer. All right. So
Smart man.
So on the kindergarten side, I was just going, it looks like we have a question. So
Yes. Committee Member Straight.
Yeah, it's basically the issue, as I understand it, is we're required by law to provide services at a certain level, and the amount of dollars to provide those required, they're not optional services, is what's putting us in the hole. Am I understanding it correctly, or am I just be corrected?
You're kind of cutting out.
Chair, I had a hard time hearing that.
I did too. Committee Member Straight, can you try that again? We were in and out.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I may have been talking to the sky or something.
Ah,
Anyway, do I understand this correctly, that these services are required and must be, services must be provided by the LEA, and that's what's driving this deficit, is that the requirement, and like you said, there's more students and with more needs.
Chair, can I answer that question?
that would be wonderful. Thank you.
So the answer is partially, Board Member Straight. So every special education student has an individualized education plan, and that drives the costs for those services. But the costs for those services don't drive the formula for the special education add-on. That is pretty much, it's kind of, it's a complicated formula, but it's pretty much an additional WPU on top of the grades 1 through 12 formula for each special education student. And so for certain special education students, the cost may be less than their IEP. For other special education students, the cost can be quite a bit more. And so the formula that allocates funding out to LEAs is just based on student counts, not the particular services that are needed. But you are correct, board member or committee member Straight, that that pot of money is used to pay for those costs, whatever those costs are, which are driven by the IEPs.
Thank you. I'm seeing no other hands, so if you'd like to continue on.
So I'll just quickly go through these programs one by one so that you can kind of see how the demographic changes and the student population changes are driving these numbers. So, so the first one, kindergarten, we anticipated a large increase. As you can see, there was a $6 million increase from the legislative estimates, just so that, because LE means legislative estimates, MY means mid-year updates. And so what drove that was that
So there was a great desire for full day kindergarten, up 17% more than we thought.
and we were already projecting a large increase.
Good.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think just looking at year over year, it was somewhere in the 40s to somewhere in the high 70s. So a big change from that policy that the legislature passed. Grades 1 through 12, here, I didn't have any data points. Because it's such a large program, you can see that 611,000 WPUs this is the largest program in the entire state budget. You know, a $2.5 million change is not really much. You're talking about fractions of a percent there. So it was pretty much flat from what, going back to the overall picture there. I didn't really have any data points to share on that. On professional staff here, what drove this, so the kindergarten through grades 1 through 12 WPUs, one of the reasons why there was a deficit to begin with in the legislative estimates is that the legislature didn't adjust. So kindergarten grades 1 through 12 and NEST WPUs factor into the formula. And so so kindergarten full day K obviously increased the number of WPUs, but there wasn't a commensurate increase on professional staff. And so that was corrected in the enrollment growth piece of this next year's budget. But there was also a change here. You can see that the deficit went down, a change of 1.4 million. And that's because the other piece of that formula are these ratios. And the ratios are basically a measure of teacher longevity and their degrees. And so overall statewide, there was a slight decrease on those ratios, which drove the $1.4 million positive change. In this case, it looks negative, but it was a savings. So hopefully that answers that question. On the SPED add-on, we'd already talked about House Bill 113. So there's on the ADM side, between our projections and the mid-year updates, there was a 1.14% increase, and we were already projecting an increase on special education ADM. On special education preschool here, I wanted to point out that this increase was not actually a cost to the program. There was a formula issue that we didn't allocate all the WPUs, and we just corrected for that in the mid-year update. So it was about 300 WPUs that we allocated out to correct that. So there was no change actually on preschool populations or anything like that. On the CTE side, I don't directly administer the CTE program. I'm very grateful. On the calculation front, Wendy Morton does a great job in the CTE office to do that. And I wouldn't be able to speak to what drove the 1.2 million additional in cost there. But CTE funding is driven by CTE ADM generated in the CTE programs generally. There are a lot of different pieces and parts to that though. So the last piece I wanted to bring up here is the at-risk add-on. And this is the economically disadvantaged counts. These are the students who qualify for free and reduced price lunch. There was growth in that population above projections as well. So hopefully this kind of gives you a picture of how, you know, the demographic changes that you're seeing overall is then translating into funding. So the last thing I'm going to show you is just on the other big programs that drove deficits in the program. So on the charter school local replacement side, there was growth in the charter school enrollments above projections at 1.35%. And then on educator salary adjustments, there was that almost 2% growth for teachers overall. And then the voted and board local levy programs, these are the guarantee programs for school districts. There was actually a savings on the weighted average voted levy. So the average voted levy that went down slightly, which created some savings. So at the end of the day, I just wanted to show you how I got to this number, $32 million. And this is the entire MSP. And just to reiterate that we have funding in the enrollment growth contingency fund to cover this. This was a bigger change than we normally see. Usually it can be positive or negative with the mid-year updates, but 32 million is a pretty large change on that front. Again, what really drove it was special ed growth, but there were a lot of pieces and parts to that, as you saw. The last thing I'll say, in your backups, we provided the WPU change as well as programmatic WPU change, LEA by LEA, so you can see that. And these are this is the contact information for the MSP team, and happy to answer any other questions.
That's wonderful. I am not seeing any other questions. That's a lot of work and a lot of great information, and we are fortunate to have it in your hands, Dale. I know you've got a great team with you, and interesting year in the financial world, but it looks like we've planned accordingly. So that's wonderful. All right. But Dale, don't go too far, because from what I can see, you have another information item coming right up. And so looks like you provided us with 2 entrees today. We had MSP and now we have NES. So back to you.
Chair,
Sam, it looks
I
like
think
Sam's here.
we have Sam for this item.
Okay, Sam, thanks for joining us. Hope you had a good PEA meeting.
We did, and interestingly enough, Sam Uri, School Finance Director, interestingly enough, the new NES formula was a large topic of conversation there at the Public Education Appropriations Committee meeting.
So you just got everything right on the top of your head, ready to go.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So what we have in backups is maybe a little outdated. You know, there have been several iterations. Our staff has worked with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office and the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget to to provide calculations. Our staff was, as you know, very involved with the original WestEd work to kind of identify some of those district level economies of scale. And I want to recognize Dr. Nestor Rodriguez, our economist, for a lot of his great work in this area, as well as Dale Frost, that have been instrumental in helping move this forward.
And Sam, can I just interject here to the committee that when they say they've been doing work, I know they have been meeting weekly, if not more than weekly, for the past 2 months at least on this project. So this was bringing in so many people and trying their very best to look at all the angles.
I think there have over the course of this work been hundreds of spreadsheets and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I do want to clarify that as the board has not, made a formal motion or voted one way or another to support this, none of our staff have made any policy calls. We're really have been providing just that assistance in calculations and things like that. And so it really is a policymaker decision and those sorts of things. But what I want to, if we could have, I don't know, Cami, if you're able to display the first backup there, that would be great. So I guess at a high level, what's important to understand is that the Necessarily Existent Small Schools program has been around for a very, very long time, and it is basically 100% school based. It's based on the school itself and whether that school through an application process has been determined to be necessarily existent. And so some of the drawbacks there are that it may not incorporate the whole district as a whole. And so that's been some of the policymaker inclination to maybe make some changes. Additionally, it is basically impossible because it was done so long ago to replicate some of the curves and things. This backup really just shows the existing necessarily existent small schools and their types. And so again, it really is high level, on a high level is school based as it exists now. And the idea coming from the legislators is to make it more of a district-based operation with some school-based factors. So if we can go to the next backup there, unless there are questions on the existing necessarily existent small schools.
I'm not seeing any questions.
But again, as it was just released today, the most current version of the formula is there in the Public Education Appropriations Committee backups. So, would encourage board members to take a look at those. This is a fairly long document, but Ben Leishman of the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office put this together to kind of explain the rationale behind the changes and that it is now a two-factor. So if we can scroll down just a little bit here. It is now a two-factor formula where the size of the district based on enrollment plays into it. And there's been a percentile selected where you get a full weight based on your district size. And that allows to kind of have some more predictability in the district-wide operations. However, so if we can keep scrolling there to that first graph. Perfect. So if we just use the district size factor, you can see there on the far left end, Daggett would basically get 3 WPUs weighted above the normal weighting because they're the smallest school district. And based on enrollments, it would gradually decline to where you would get a very partial weighting if you were, for example, a Duchesne school district there with 0.073. If we can keep scrolling, the issue there is that it doesn't fully account, keep going just to the next graph, it doesn't fully account for the geography of some of our districts. And so San Juan maybe is the biggest example there, where you have the green bars are what they're currently receiving under necessarily existent small schools, and the blue would be again, just solely based on their district enrollment, what they would get under a scale of operations factor. And so some of those districts with bigger geography challenges kind of would lose out under just that scenario. And so the idea has been to incorporate more of a half and half approach where certainly the district's enrollment as a whole is important, but also acknowledging geography and remoteness with a school-based factor. And so if we can scroll down again to the next graph, it is on page 5, I believe. Perfect. So these, now we're stacking the light blue bar, which is the school-based factor, on top of that darker blue bar, which is the district-based factor. And so for almost every district in this scenario, they're receiving more funding. There has been some back and forth on different county classes and things like that. At this point, policymakers had originally excluded schools based in the third class counties. They have now decided that in the current proposal, third class counties with district enrollments under 2,000 students would be included. And so that does benefit North and South Summit, who are in that situation. To do that and keep costs under control, they did reduce the percentiles somewhat. And so that does have some impacts on various districts. But that's the basic idea. And again, I want to emphasize that we've done so many calculations. The most current one is was presented to Public Education Appropriations Subcommittee today. We do believe a bill will be forthcoming shortly, but it looks like we have a question here from Member Davis.
Yes, go ahead, Vice Chair Davis.
Thanks. On this, you probably all caught this and I don't know, out to lunch or something, but why again, is it just a geographic factor that you're talking about that's districts like Weber or Tooele would be there? Because they aren't small schools. I mean, they have like thousands of kids, bigger than some of our smaller districts. So is that just a geography thing?
Well, right. They are excluded on the county class side. The geography piece of it is schools like Dugway or that are in a larger district, right? But schools that are remote within that district.
Oh. So it's not the LEA. It's
Right.
they have an outlier that
Right.
qualifies for some extra support.
Right.
Got it.
So if you use Weber as an example, they are receiving some NEST funds currently. The name of Snowcrest Junior High in Eden is receiving those funds. It does not qualify as a 42 or a 43 locale under the NCES most remote designations. It's a little too close to Ogden, for example. So it would not generate any funds under the new proposal. Whereas some of the schools in Tooele would still generate a small amount of funding, but there's no district or LEA-wide generation of any funds due to their size.
That's helpful. Thank you. And I love
It-
Eden. It's beautiful there.
It is. It certainly is. So I think at a high level, it's just important to understand that it is still somewhat complicated, but these factors, rather than being completely school-based, we've kind of transitioned into a proposal that is both school remoteness-based and district size-based. So I believe we've got the new formula up there. There we go. So overall, this new formula would cost about $25.9 million more than the NEST currently costs, with a total cost of about $74 million. And so these are district by district comparisons under what they're currently receiving under NES, what they would receive under the district scale of operations factor and the rural school factor. There are certainly policymaker decisions that have led to certain elements. But currently what's being proposed is that it would district scale of operations would apply for counties in the 4th through 6th class. Additionally, 3rd class counties enrolling fewer than 2,000 students. And then the school-based weights are a 0.15 per student weighting for what we call rural distant classified schools, which is the 42 code under the NCES locales, and 0.6 for the most rural designated schools, the rural remote schools. And as you can see here, most all of the districts would receive an increase besides those that are currently receiving funds under NES and are in the 3rd class counties and have enrollments over 2,000. So that would be Box Elder, Iron, and then those larger districts like Tooele, Washington would also be losing some of those funds. Happy to explore effects on certain districts as board members would like. Happy to answer questions, but that's really where we're at in the process. And again, appreciative of our team and their hard work to provide the legislature with this information. Looks like
Question from Dale. Comment from Dale.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Dale Frost, MUSC Administrator. I just wanted to reiterate kind of what's the story behind this, that and the NES formula the current NES formula is often policymakers think that solves all rural school funding issues. And the challenge is that there are rural districts that don't receive funds under NES. There are, in my opinion, NES schools that probably shouldn't get funding under the NES formula. And is this new NES formula perfect? By no means. And as we've discussed multiple times, whenever you talk about funding formulas, there's always trade-offs. There's no silver bullet. But at least I would argue, and I have with districts, BAs as we're going through this, and they've been very helpful in giving good feedback, and we're getting to a good place, is that this recommendation from the legislature covers more of those schools that we really consider rural and isolated, and it covers more districts that weren't receiving under the formula, like a JUAB or a Morgan wasn't receiving anything under NES. And so there's certainly impacts. The only other thing I would say is that in the recommendation that there is a 4-year one-time request to hold those who are receiving funds under this so that they can have some time to adjust. They receive one-time funds to basically keep those they would get those funds for a time, and then that would trail off. And then there's also a recommendation on how to stabilize funding if your school is no longer a rural school under the definitions, or if you become like a class 3 county and you were a class 4 county. So we're thinking through some of those things, more to come on the actual bill, but hopefully it can kind of give you a sense of the story. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that important information. We are kind of moving through this really efficiently, team. Thank you so much. But we also have a lot left. So if we could have, we'll go to item 1.9 and maybe get the high level version. Again, this is another information item. It is regarding the Educator Incentive Program Report. And we should have Director of Teaching and Learning Jennifer Thronson and Evaluation Specialist Julie Lindell.
Good morning. This one's going to be led by Julie, if you would so be obliged, Chair.
Thank you.
She's done all the work.
Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you, Chair Norton. Just briefly, we've provided that report to you. It was requested in the August board meeting that an overview summary of the incentive programs be brought to the Finance Committee, and that's what this report is. And if you'd like, I can give you just a brief high-level summary if you'd like, or I can answer questions.
Good, thank you. If you can just do the brief summary and any questions from the committee when we are finished for a couple of minutes, committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair Norton. I'll go ahead and give you a brief summary. So the state oversees 3 teacher salary supplement programs. The first one is the teacher salary supplement program that's specific to high needs areas, includes maths and science courses where we have a shortage of teachers. And in this, 92% of those that are eligible apply for and receive the stipend. And the most that they can receive is $4,100. It is prorated based on the percentage of time they spend teaching those courses. We also looked at their retention rates because that is what it's targeted at. And we did show an increased retention amongst teachers who were receiving this supplement. And we also look at their academic impact. And it was a little bit mixed as far as that on the teacher salary supplement. Their math proficiency was slightly lower than those who did not receive the supplement, but the science proficiency was slightly higher than those who did not receive it. Overall, and in all cases, they were at least at state average or above on those receiving the supplement for their math or science scores. And a second area that the board oversees is the National Board Certified Teachers Supplement. And about 102 people qualify for that. Once they've moved out of a classroom position and into administration, they no longer qualify. And so for those that qualify, almost 100% that qualify do apply and receive that. And they can receive either $1,000 or $2,000. $1,000 if they're teaching in a typical school, and $2,000 if they're in a Title I school. Their scores were higher across the board in all subject areas, science, math, and literacy. And they also had a significantly higher retention rate. So that shows a fairly good effectiveness for that program. And then the third program that is overseen by USBE is Effective Teachers in High Poverty Schools. And this targets specifically reading growth in our low-income schools. There is a LEA match requirement, and because of that, many of the qualifying LEAs choose not to participate, but about 74% of eligible educators did receive funding last year. They had higher scores across subject areas, which I think is to be expected a little bit since they only receive it if they're already a high-performing teacher. The retention rates in this one is a little bit mixed. Some years we show a higher retention rate and some years a lower. We do have some qualitative survey information from this group, and they just express that a lot of things play into their interest in staying in a particular school, and but the funding that they receive is appreciated as a form of gratitude for their efforts and their work. So that's kind of the high-level overview of what our different incentive programs offer and the results that we saw. And it was a positive note to note that there was fairly good retention across most of those programs and good academic showing connected with it. So if you have any specific questions, I'll be happy to answer them the best that I can.
Okay, it looks like that committee member Straight has a question or comment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Chair, I don't know if anyone remembers, but I did start a business case to look at and evaluate these programs and to make recommendations on potential changes or improvements. What would be the process by which I could continue that? Because I know there was additional information that was gathered. I do know we had nationally board certified teachers come and speak before the board a couple months ago. What would be the process to start looking at that? And any suggestions on how that might be best taken on, so we can actually have something next year that's developed and ready to move in legislation. Anyway, I'll listen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chair Norton. I know that there are a couple of different bills currently in the legislature that are approaching interest in changing the way that some of the funding on these things are handled, specifically with the teacher salary supplement program. And Senator Fillmore is running some bills, and there may be some others as well. But that's definitely something that is in the conversation with the legislature this year. Moving forward, I'm perhaps Dr. Thronson could answer a little bit more procedurally what are the best steps that you could consider, but that's kind of where we're at for this at this point.
I'm sorry, I was multitasking. Can you repeat the question? I'd be happy to try.
Member Straight, you're muted.
Oh, I was hopeful that Julia would take and communicate.
What you were asking?
I'm happy to do that. If you'd like. Member Straight is just asking if what he's interested in, if we wanted to make changes or updates to these programs, what would procedurally be the best next steps in doing so. And I shared with him that there are some at least one or two bills in the legislature this year already around the teacher salary supplement program that Senator Fillmore is running. But if there's additional, procedural steps that he's interested in taking, I felt like you might be able to better share with him.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Julie. I appreciate that. So Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. In terms of if the board wants to take further action, ultimately we would need like a board decision, obviously. But there is a bill open on effective teachers in high poverty schools, or maybe not a bill. Right now, that one is being proposed to be rolled into the WPU at-risk add-on. So it may be repealed at the end of the day. Not that people couldn't give an incentive for teachers in that way, but at this point, that is where the legislature and PDA has made a recommendation to kind of dissolve the effective teachers in high poverty schools by rolling it up into the WPU. So that might be a place where the board could say, oh no, we want to keep this program, and they can make a motion to have staff or board leadership reach out and see what kind of efforts could be made to maintain that program. For the TSSP, as Julie mentioned, that one is in a bill right now to go from being, we tell them which areas are of high need, to local decision making, where the local LEA gets to decide 2 to 5 areas of need in their community that they can pay those salaries. The qualifications for that eligibility remain pretty static to what they are now, like 10 years of experience and lots of other pieces. But it would open it up to being more locally driven of what are your areas of need in your communities, rather than the state data kind of projecting across the state of what the areas of need are that we see as a state. So that one's open right now. So if there is feedback, I would assume Senator Fillmore would be open. He's been great about asking for feedback on many of his bills. So if the board has some ideas of what they would like to see in that space, it might be a great item to discuss later today, so that you could charge staff or board leadership with, let's convey that information. And then the national board, I think, as Julie highlighted, that one is probably one of our more effective programs, and the legislature invested some additional funding to kind of promote and support educators in doing that work, to some leaders around the national board locally. So we've been working with them with their reimbursement requests, and they're going out into local communities and recruiting and helping teachers through the process. It's a pretty lengthy and intense process to become nationally board certified, but as you saw, outcomes are better, retention is better. It's a pretty worthy journey. So I hope that helps. As a board, obviously you could make some motions and bring those, but I think they'd have to go to next week's board meeting just to get to the full board pieces. They haven't been notified in advance of that 24 hours.
Yeah, I think my position, the reason I dropped the business case in the first place is I felt we needed more data. We needed a solid plan. We needed to be clear. I don't want to just throw something together and, hey, I guess we could do a vote of support, but I think we need something that's more more put together than just an endorsement. So anyway, I'll just pursue that. And I just wanted to be remembered that we needed to, that this is an area of interest for me. We have more data than we had when the national board certification first went into place and when there was funding that was being sought for that. So yeah, I think there's some, I want, whatever we bring forth, I would prefer to make certain we're on very solid ground in our presentation down to the, it's like doing your yard too early without having your sprinkling system in or something. Anyway, thank you. I'm done.
All right, seeing no other questions, is there anything else for this particular information item? And I guess I'm directing that either to Jennifer or, where am I? Julie.
Thank you, Chair Norton. That's all the information I had to share unless you have additional questions.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you. All right, we're going to jump down then to to informational item 1.111. This is our PMR for USIMS, and we have IT Director Jared Felt and Katrina Brinkley. If they could give us a very brief overview of the key and critical points for this month.
Thanks, Chair Norton. I'm just going to turn it right over to Katrina, if that's okay.
You bet. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm not even going to share my screen. I was actually going to ask you if you wanted just a brief highlight of what we've been working on. So for our educator team, just a notice that this was the same presentation that we gave to PEA last Monday. So if you wanted to refer to that, you could as well. But the highlights for our educator domain are that they have moved from a red status to a yellow status. They are working on that green still, but they were able to accomplish some major feats over our Christmas break, and they were able to get to that yellow status, and they will be delivering some major functionality within this quarter with University Recommends and with the background checks for educators. For the for the student domain, our highlights are that the team continues to work on the student backpack. They are working closely with our data privacy team to ensure that all of the data that we are pulling in for the student backpack is in line with board requirements as to data sharing and information. And for the finance domain, the big highlight is we published the USIMS Finance API to our vendors. So the information and the documentation for that has been sent out to all of our third-party vendors for the finance domain. So they're working on integrating and getting data connected for USIMS. Those are the major highlights for each of the domain.
Great, thank you. Committee members, have we got any questions? I am not seeing any. Thank you so much for all your work. I can just feel this ball rolling down the hill, picking up speed, and it's exciting to see things actually come into play and fit together and, actually have usage going on. So that's wonderful. You guys have worked so hard, and things are just going to be a big help to our whole system. All right, we will now move to a phrase that we have heard over and over and over in the legislative chambers this particular year, and that is measuring the results of appropriations for specific programs. In the legislature, we keep hearing about ROI. So I will turn the time over to Chief of Staff Sarah Young and Assistant Superintendent Jacobson. And I know that since he keeps getting all the questions, Chair Moss is highly invested in this as well.
So, Chair, with your approval, I think our Chair Moss is best to lead out on this to kind of provide the vision if he's available.
He is available. Thank you.
I am here. Thank you, Chief of Staff Young and Chair. Can you guys see and hear me? I'm ducking in and out of alleyways and closets today. It's kind of a little crazy.
We've been there.
So, well, thank you, and I appreciate it. this is something that I've been talking about, and I think it's led into a lot of discussion on the Hill, including from Superintendent Dixon, Sheridan, PEA. That's one of the things we're thinking about, is this idea. And I know it sounds corporate to say ROI, and I think it's often pointed out that what we do in education is really more important than dollars and cents. And I think that's precisely the reason that we want to be focused on what is the outcome that we get for the investment, and just ask good, healthy questions about, how are we getting the water to the end of the row? How are we making a difference? So 2 pieces of this, I won't take forever, but I think 2 pieces converge. One, we're in a tight funding year up here on the Hill, and we're up here advocating for more money for public education. The question always arises, how are you tracking what you're doing with the money you have? And I think we are solidly, fiscally prudent in how we operate. Sometimes we don't necessarily connect it all the way to outcomes in a way that we can say, look, here's what we're doing and here's what we've reevaluated. Here's how we're asking those healthy questions internally, just to make sure that we're kind of getting the best bang for the buck. So those questions as they come up, but I think really prior to this, I've sort of been talking about it for a year or so before I was in the chair's role, when I was in the finance chair. How do you tie it to performance measures? And that coincides with something Chief of Staff Young has been doing, which is a big project of updating those performance measures. And I really appreciate it. There's a shift from inputs to outcomes, and looking at how do we affect things at the end of the row. The hard thing in education is always finding correlation, let alone causation. But it's a question I think that needs to be asked. And I think what Chief of Staff Young has done with others in helping update those performance measures allows us this opportunity. So what I have proposed is that we cycle through the departments in the agency, in the office, we are an office. I keep talking about an agency, but to cycle through and ask ourselves, between this committee and our staff, what are the things we look for in terms of performance measures or outcomes for the dollars that go into our internal budget? There's a broader question, of course, in the state of whether we're getting ROI in terms of student success and outcomes. And there's a bunch of those, different performance measures or outcome measures. But this is focused on internally. What are we doing as the state office, state board, to kind of track that bang for the buck? And I think the opportunity, as I see it, would be to cycle through the various departments and ask each department to look at the performance measures that we've put together, things on which we report to the legislature, look at immediate or interim measures of outcome. That might be, for example, placing laptops in classrooms. The ultimate goal, of course, is student performance using those laptops. And so the opportunity, as I see it, is to say, okay, how are we doing in terms of those intermediate measures of success and what we work on in a department? And how are those outcomes correlated, at least, if not, an understanding of causation, to those ultimate objectives of student success? And as I've been working on ULEAD, that's part of what they're trying to do. We've now got higher ed folks involved in looking at outliers in different successful schools, different areas that the steering committee came up with, technology being one of them, and saying, can we do a better job of asking what works? And there's so many great things in Utah education. That's kind of a R&D approach on the ULEAD side, but internally, can we ask ourselves, how does what we're doing contribute to student success? And if it's an intermediate measure, like getting good technology in schools, are we doing that in a way that the research shows adds up to ultimate success? It's a tough question. I'm not suggesting a huge research project, but I'm suggesting that we can begin the process of asking ourselves those questions. And as we work as a finance committee, subject to Chair Norton, I don't want to take over finance, but if there's a way that we could just sort of make that part of our interaction between elected board members on finance, working with our departments so that they come up with those performance measures, and we have a discussion on an ongoing basis about how we're doing and whether we want to, look at how we're investing those dollars, and whether we're learning different things that might lead us to, looking at making tweaks or reallocations within those departments. So that's what I'm proposing. And I think as Superintendent Dixon was sharing this with President Adams at the Senate a couple of weeks ago and sharing it with PEA, I think it's gotten a lot of good feedback, this idea that we're just asking ourselves those healthy internal questions while we are continuing to advocate for an increase in education funding. So thank you, Chair. That's where I wanted to go. And I think I had some great discussions with Chief of Staff Young. So happy to answer questions or turn it back to Chief of Staff Young.
It doesn't look like you see any questions. Chief of Staff Young, would you like to add on to this?
So I'll just talk about what it looks like to operationalize it. So again, I think that it's a really important project for our agency, especially related to tying in some of our different considerations of budget and finance to the work of our performance measures and what we report to the legislature as an agency. Two things the Finance Committee may consider. So we talked about potentially selecting like a pilot group of programs or funding line items that could be identified for us to do like a first round or a proof of concept. So that would give us the opportunity as staff to kind of work through the process, bring you back. Here's what it looks like for this committee to give feedback to before we took it more wide scale across the agency. I think that would be beneficial to us just to make sure that we're in alignment with what the vision is. And if there's any, like I said, tweaks or changes we can make as we build this out, we get that feedback early on. So that is probably the one request that we would have as staff related to moving this forward is just direction from you as a finance committee on maybe that selection process.
Great, thank you. Committee members, what are your initial thoughts, questions, suggestions on what you've heard so far and with this idea that Chief of Staff Young has just talked to us about for an initial beginning? Vice Chair Davis, I see your hand, and followed by that, let's go with Committee Member Straight.
Yeah, I think even on a personal level, it makes sense to review what we're doing in our personal lives, in our employment, in our policymaking world, in our agencies. But do you have suggestions, Chair, if I may address Chief of Staff Young, do you have suggestions about messaging? Because part of what you look at when you review these types of things are efficiency, but efficiency tends to lead into a conversation about efficacy. And people may feel that while you could be doing a review to say, gosh, we really need this, we continue to need this, and it will help with our advocacy, they may perceive it as, gosh, all these departments are on the chopping block and they're just trying to get rid of us. I mean, what's the messaging here that that would be important so that people understand we're trying to take a thoughtful look? At least I think that Chair Moss, if what I'm hearing right, is proposing to take a thoughtful look and look at several aspects of our departments and areas.
Chair, was that for me or for Chief of Staff Young? I can respond if you'd like, or I can defer to Chief of Staff Young.
It was for Chief of Staff Young, just some
Okay.
tips as she works inside the agency to give us some advice. But if you have advice or thoughts that you've already thought through, I'd love to hear those too, if it pleases the chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll certainly defer to Chief of Staff Young, but this is not like chopping block. It's not like somebody on the Hill or the legislature has said, slash your budget or anything like that. I think it's just a healthy way to work together between elected board members and staff to just ask those questions ongoing. How are we getting the best bang for the buck for students? So I certainly defer to Chief of Staff Young, but to me, these are just healthy, like Member Davis said, just healthy questions that you ask. And I would hope this would be driven by our staff in terms of finding those performance measures that allow them to tag up. And sometimes that's 2 or 3 steps, right? Sometimes you're 2 or 3 steps removed from ultimate measures of student success. But I would hope it's a collaborative opportunity to work together on an ongoing basis to just ask that question. Are we getting the best bang for the buck? And certainly not, under any intent to like slash jobs or, kind of that kind of review. I think it's just a healthy opportunity to ask ourselves the question and then also be able to report to the Hill, to the folks that have the checkbook. Hey, these are all the things that we've come up with. I think it will be exciting, frankly. So I'll defer to Sarah.
Yes, and I concur. So I think the way that we have at least kind of developed the vision around this is that it is staff driven to bring you back a vision of how their programs, you know, both align with those short-term outputs or outcomes, and then, you know, feeding into a performance measure that may be further up the chain. By working with staff and asking for their expertise and input to say, what does that look like? And then bringing that to you. I view it as more of a ground up kind of organic piece to it. Whereas I think Vice Chair, or pardon me, Board Member Davis, to your point, when you apply a rubric without that staff input, I think that's when it can sometimes feel a bit oppressive. And so we're really looking at the first version of asking our staff to really develop that and bring that back to you as a committee, not the other way around.
Thank you. And Chair Norton,
Amen.
I would be supportive. Oh, I would be supportive of a pilot prior to the full shebang.
Thank you. Board Member Straight?
I would agree with that. I do know there is evaluation going on. I was up at PEA, or maybe something else, and the question that came back from the legislator was in reference to, and I won't name it, but they actually named a specific area within our agency and asked the question this way: how does it take so many people to do this one job? And I thought there was a good response back from staff and from Chair Moss that there's a lot to that. And so perhaps the way we need to look at this goes back to a previous conversation that's been going on for the last 2 years, which is market adjustments. But within those market adjustments, we've also asked for additional FTEs. And so I don't think we start this with the end in mind. I think we need to be honest in our research questions. But I think, and I could be wrong, I think that what we'll find is we're short people. And so I'm absolutely in favor of this. Now, I do not want my statement to in any way influence how we go about doing this and the results, because that would be just as guilty as taking the thing that obviously we have too many people to do that simple little job of providing, I won't even say, because then it'll say which department, because I don't want anyone in our agency to feel like they're under the gun. So anyway, that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. And it sounds to me like I'm hearing some positive thoughts about this process and especially about the pilot situation going forth. Another thing that I've taken from our legislative meetings that, you know, I've listened to is they've been talking about how important the mission and vision is in helping us move, you know, our analysis towards what our mission and vision are. And so to use that as part of this platform going forth. But yeah, I think we can, you know, look at some good analytical questions. And I agree with you, Member Straight, that this is a spectrum. And you know, that there's all sorts of ways that we can look to, sometimes that means that we do get to request additional resources. Sometimes it means that we look at reallocating resources, and sometimes it means that we just find new ways to be more efficient. But, you know, different times calls for different analysis, and that's what people do all across, you know, the world. And in managing jobs that need to be done. And in our case, we're not managing jobs, we're optimizing educational opportunities. And so I appreciate that. Are there any final concerns or questions? I can see Chair Moss's hand up. Chair Moss, why don't we give you the last word on this, and then we can take a final motion.
Thanks, Chair. Unless there were questions, I didn't want to
There
jump
were
on
not.
anybody's. Okay. I'll just say, I think those that have expressed their opinion are the same as mine. I see it as a collaborative process. I see it as a good way for we as board members to be part of that internal analysis with staff. And I'll just say, you know, there's a lot of policy. Chair Huntsman had to convince me to go into finance because frankly, I'm a law guy. I'm a law and licensing. I'm not necessarily a numbers guy. He gave me the whole finance pitch and I really enjoyed it. And I think that something I heard at a legislative meeting once really kind of clicks with this. They were talking about, well, there's policy over here and there's the funding in dollars and cents over here. Somebody said the most important policy bill in the legislature is the budget. That's where you determine how you're investing in getting ultimately success for kids. And that's partly where I think finance is interesting. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to be thinking that way about, you know, not only the inputs and making sure the trains run on time, but what's the ultimate direction where we're trying to get those trains to go and kind of work together on those questions of how the budget's helping us get there. So I do love the idea of a pilot program. I'd love to see us, you know, try to work with Chief of Staff Young and find a way to get this kicked off. Appreciate everybody for the opportunity to talk about it.
Great, thank you. I will say that I'm going to try to track down, there were some really, in an earlier meeting in the legislature, there were some questions that were shared about analyzing, and it was something totally different than what we're talking about right here, but they were thoughtful questions. And I'm going to try to track down that and we'll get that either in backup for next month or to you individually so that you can start thinking about questions that you would have about the work that we are doing and the goals that we're trying to meet to help. And that looks like we're at the end of our time, and we have another meeting coming up very shortly. So do we have a motion to adjourn? Okay, I see one thumb up for
I
let's
move to adjourn.
adjourn. All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay,